So, Tom?
I want to talk about something that happened over the Christmas break. When Southwest started about 51 years ago, it really was a simple intrastate airline that was really meant to connect three cities across the state of Texas, catering towards low-budget travelers. Now, at the time, there were a variety of other airlines that were really catering towards the elite, those who had a lot of money to be able to do things like air travel, which was kind of at the time something that only the elite typically did. So it really tried to cater towards the low budget travelers. And its goal really was simple, to make air travel accessible to everybody. So it was kind of a disruptor in the industry back when it first started. Now, a lot's changed since then over the course of that 51 years, but Southwest has really tried to stay true to some of its founding principles. Number one, they consistently tried to offer extremely low fares for their constituents. They also traditionally use second-tier airports to overall reduce costs of renting that space and landing and taking off from those different locations. If you've always seen the Southwest Airlines fleet, it's traditionally the same single aircraft type, which overall reduces training for actual pilots, so they can fly on any single aircraft in the fleet. The maintenance crews, they don't have to train on a variety of different aircraft and understand those things, as well as the actual crew themselves. They're all familiar with it. With the same type of aircraft. The scheduling for Southwest has been a bit of a challenge recently, but the goal is to maximize flight time by minimizing the turnaround times by these kind of quick turns, regional airports, smaller spaces. And they also have these regional point-to-point routes that are really the short and in-demand routes that try to operate at a very high frequency to maximize thoroughfare and people going from point to point. Now, despite all of its successes and the prominence of Southwest Airlines, they found themselves in the news over the Christmas holiday break, really behind an unfortunate narrative. When a severe weather storm really crippled most of the United States and many airlines operations across the U.S., many hopeless travelers witnessed, I'll say, thousands and thousands of flights a day be canceled literally right before their eyes, significantly impacting their personal holiday plans. Now, the worst day, statistically, was December 23rd, with a whopping 5,934 flight cancellations across the U.S. Now, it'd be one thing if the canceled flights were effectively spread amongst the other carriers, but unfortunately, Southwest took the biggest hit. Southwest's number of canceled flights accounted for about 87% of the flights canceled nationwide over the course of about a week, which really left many passengers reeling, employees scrambling, and really even the Secretary of Transportation calling for an investigation. Now Southwest in many areas has failed in this case in many different areas, but it's a trend, to use Peter's terminology, that the data has been showing for actually quite some time. So according to some data from the U.S. Bureau of Transportation Statistics, Southwest's cancellation rate has more than tripled in the last decade. In addition, it has experienced more cancellations than the majority of its competitors. And it's not only the cancellation data. The data set also highlights that Southwest's on-time percentage and on-time metrics are actually lower than it's been in almost a decade as well. So what really happened? What's really going on here? And did a winter storm really cripple one of the biggest, lowest cost carriers in the world? Not really, and not precisely. So many thought leaders and industry pundits have been analyzing and really dissecting this narrative for the last couple of weeks, as you can imagine. But when you dissect all the information, there's a few consistent conclusions that come out of those narratives as well. I'll start with Captain Casey Murray, who's currently the president of the Southwest Airlines Pilot Association, and he claims that the biggest issue right now is some of Southwest's business practices. Southwest scheduling and software system is really one of the biggest culprits. I'm sure you've heard that in the news and a variety of articles. Their ability to track and reroute flights was crippled with the massive quantity of flight cancellations. Their outdated software traditionally would allow them to do that for a fleet maybe the size, a quarter or a third of the size of its fleet today. But whenever the massive amounts of cancellations got hit or were realized, they just couldn't keep up with that massive quantity, which really put the system in lockdown. Unfortunately, this system hasn't really changed in about 30 years. Even though the leadership has been consistently informed and warned by its employee unions, but no real investment or effort has been put into making modifications to evolve that technology. Secondarily, the way the company's leadership chose to handle its communication outreach was not really efficient or very effective either. Firstly, there was little to no interaction with leadership in the public early on, which allowed a horrifying narrative to emerge about the personal experiences of thousands of stranded passengers and employees whose precious Christmas vacations had been ruined. And we all know that if you can get in front of those narratives, it's a lot better than actually having to play catch up behind thousands and thousands of stories with your personal brand being impacted along the way. Now, when leadership did finally offer their thoughts, they appeared to almost avoid taking responsibility. They ended up blaming the weather, the FAA, and some pundits and some investigators have actually claimed that they've actually gone as far as to blame some of their employees for some of the issues that they found as well, which isn't necessarily great leadership when it comes down to leading an organization through crisis management. So the company leadership has consistently been apologetic, but we all know apologies really only go so far. So take Conrad Stoll, for example, who's a 66-year-old retired construction worker in Missouri who was planning to fly back from Kansas City to Los Angeles for his dad's 90th birthday party. But his flight was actually canceled, and he won't actually get to see his 88-year-old mother either. And he's not quite sure that by the next time he actually gets home to see them, that they're actually going to be alive to see it. Or the Berger family, who were supposed to be on a once-in-a-lifetime family cruise from San Diego to Mexico, but their flights were, and their subsequent rerouted flight were also canceled, leaving their Christmas vacation memories tarnished as well. Now, these special moments that many people lost will never be forgotten, and they may forever haunt the airline with certain passengers. Now, I would argue that the only good thing that Southwest has going for them is that they have enough historical goodwill, execution promise, and also generally a strong brand that may allow them to cushion, give them enough cushion to effectively weather this storm, and no pun intended. More than, say, Spirit Airlines, who has a bad rap, or maybe would provoke the attitude of, oh, they did it again. I can't say that I'm surprised, right? People don't say that about Southwest because of the strong brand that they offer, and they've offered for quite some time. So how can we prevent things like this from happening in the future? Now, most companies, especially airlines, cannot really overinvest in IT infrastructure, and they need to quit spending money on only the glamorous aspects of the business, only those that are in the public eye. If the fundamental pieces and framework of your business are not a well-oiled machine, and you're not investing under the hood as well, you're really planting the seeds for future underperformance and potential future failures as well. So we need to spend the money and reinvest in the business as often as we can, and don't wait until it's too late. Really, the strong policies and business practices are really the best prevention for future failures. We also need to ensure that we embrace the service paradox by providing such a magnificent crisis management recovery plan of action that those affected are more impressed with your response rather than the failure itself. So that's something that a lot of service industries are actually leaning towards, looking into that concept of managing a crisis so well that people don't forget about it. They don't have much of an issue with the actual failure itself. And lastly, I would argue making sure that we listen and learn from our employees is just as important as listening to the voice of the customer. Everyone's caught up on the voice of the customer, and I can understand that and I can appreciate that. But the employees are the crux of your organization and the blood, lifeline of your team. So leaders have to listen to their frontline leaders, especially when they've been telling the same story for over 3 decades. And if you're not creating the environment where employees feel safe to bring up those major concerns or issues, then you have a very different problem. And you've basically built a toxic culture that will only perpetuate these future disconnects and failures until it's seriously addressed. So overall, though, this complex failure has really led Southwest to potentially realize a loss of almost $900 million. Now, one could reframe in a positive way and offer that they just spent $900 million educating their organization about how not to do things in the future. But however you frame the situation, the negative publicity, the lost memories, and the feeling of embarrassment and abandonment most of its employees felt will be difficult to make up for in the future, especially in the short term. This is a long road investment that Southwest has to make in order to prove its performance. So the question is this really the beginning of the end for Southwest? Have they had a good 51-year run, maybe a little bit longer? Or will they finally listen to those around them and realize that they can't rewrite their past, but they can surely start fresh by turning a new page and writing a new chapter by learning from their previous mistakes?